The morning sun barely broke through the thick industrial smog that hung over the Riverside manufacturing plant in Detroit, Michigan. It was March 15th, 2019, and inside the massive facility, chaos had become the new normal. Marcus Thompson, the plant manager, stood in his glass-walled office overlooking the production floor. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, and dark circles under his eyes told the story of too many sleepless nights. Below him, millions of dollars worth of machinery sat silent and useless. The German-made automated assembly line, purchased just 6 months earlier for $12 million, had stopped working 3 weeks ago. What was supposed to revolutionize their production had become their biggest nightmare. Every day the machine stayed broken. The company lost $200,000. Workers stood around idle, some playing cards, others just staring at their phones. The usual hum and rhythm of productivity had been replaced by an eerie quiet. "This is a disaster," Marcus muttered to himself, running his hands through his graying hair. The trouble had started on a cold February morning. The main assembly robot, a sophisticated piece of German engineering called the Auto Precision 5000, had suddenly stopped mid-cycle. At first, the maintenance team thought it was a simple glitch. They reset the system, checked the basic connections, and tried to restart it. Nothing worked. Then the problem spread like a disease. Within 2 days, all 6 machines in the production line had shut down. Error codes flashed on the digital displays, but nobody could figure out what they meant. The machines were connected in a complex network, and when one failed, it seemed to trigger failures in the others. Sarah Mitchell, the head of the engineering department, had assembled her best team immediately. 15 experienced engineers worked around the clock. They checked electrical systems, tested computer programs, examined mechanical parts, and reviewed thousands of lines of code. Days turned into weeks, but they made no progress. "We've tried everything," Sarah told Marcus during one of their daily crisis meetings. "The mechanical systems are fine. The electrical connections check out. The software seems to be running correctly. But something is preventing these machines from communicating with each other." Marcus slammed his fist on the conference table. "Then try harder. Do you know what this is costing us? The CEO is calling me every 3 hours. Our clients are threatening to cancel contracts. We have orders backed up for months." Sarah's face showed her frustration. "Sir, these machines are incredibly complex. They're not like anything we've worked with before. The manuals are in German, and even with translation, the technical specifications are extremely difficult to understand." The company brought in more experts. 20 additional engineers from different parts of the country flew in to help. They came with fancy degrees from top universities, years of experience and impressive resumes. They set up laptops all around the machines, ran diagnostic tests, and held long technical discussions using words that most people couldn't understand. Still, the machines remained silent. The German manufacturer, Kraustech Industries, was contacted. They seemed annoyed by the problem. "Our machines don't break," said Heinrich Müller, their chief technical officer, during a video call. "You must be operating them incorrectly." "We followed every instruction in the manual," Marcus replied, trying to keep his anger in check. "Then your power supply must be inadequate. Or perhaps your workers damaged something," Heinrich suggested with a dismissive wave of his hand. Marcus felt his blood pressure rising. "We paid $12 million for your equipment. The least you can do is send someone to help us." After much arguing and negotiating, Kraustech agreed to send a team of their own engineers, but they demanded $50,000 just for the consultation, plus all travel expenses. Desperate, Marcus agreed. 3 German engineers arrived 2 weeks into the crisis. They wore matching company polo shirts and carried expensive-looking equipment cases. They spoke to the American engineers with obvious superiority, making comments about American technical incompetence that they thought were too quiet to be heard. Hans, the lead German engineer, spent an entire day examining the machines. He typed commands into his laptop, studied readouts, and made notes in a leather-bound journal. The American engineers watched hopefully, thinking that surely the people who built these machines would know how to fix them. By the end of the week, even the German team was stumped. "This is most unusual," Hans admitted reluctantly. "The machines appear to be functioning correctly on an individual level, but they refuse to synchronize. It's as if something is blocking their communication protocol." "Can you fix it?" Marcus asked. His hope fading, Hans shook his head slowly. "We will need to consult with our headquarters. Perhaps there is a firmware update that was not properly installed. Or maybe the problem is with your facility's electromagnetic interference. We need more time to investigate. More time meant more money. The German team's daily rate was astronomical. But what choice did Marcus have? The company was already losing so much money that a few $1,000s more seemed almost insignificant. Meanwhile, the factory workers grew increasingly worried. Rumors spread about possible layoffs. Some employees had already started looking for other jobs. The mood in the cafeteria was grim. People spoke in hushed tones about mortgages, car payments, and college tuitions. "My daughter's starting university in the fall," said Tom Chen, a machine operator with 20 years at the plant. "If this place shuts down, I don't know what I'll do." His co-worker, Jennifer Rodriguez, nodded sympathetically. "My husband's been out of work for 6 months. We're barely making it on my salary as it is. In total, 103 engineers had now examined the machines. They came from the company, from consulting firms, from the manufacturer, and from independent contractors, each one confident at first, each one eventually defeated by the mysterious problem. The local news had picked up the story. "Detroit factory crisis deepens," read the headline. "Cutting-edge technology becomes expensive paperweight." The reporter interviewed frustrated workers and showed footage of the silent production floor. Marcus knew the company couldn't survive much longer like this. The CEO had hinted at closing the plant entirely. 1,500 jobs would be lost. The Detroit economy, already struggling, would take another hit. If you like this story, please subscribe for the next parts. Late one evening, as Marcus prepared to leave the office, he looked out at the factory floor one more time. That's when he noticed someone he'd barely paid attention to before. An older black man in a janitor's uniform was mopping the floor near the silent machines. The man would pause occasionally, look at the equipment, then continue cleaning. Marcus had seen him around for years but had never really noticed him. Just another member of the cleaning crew, invisible to most people in the facility. The managers walked past him daily without acknowledgement. The engineers never spoke to him. He was simply part of the background, like the walls or the floor itself. The janitor's name was James Washington, and he was 62 years old. He'd worked at the Riverside manufacturing plant for 37 years, starting when he was just 25. He'd seen the factory change owners 3 times, watched technology evolve from simple mechanical systems to complex computerized operations, and outlasted countless managers and engineers who came and went. But nobody knew his story. Nobody knew what skills he might possess. Nobody thought to ask the quiet janitor if he had any ideas. As Marcus watched James push his mop bucket toward the storage room, he felt a strange thought cross his mind. Then he dismissed it. What could a janitor possibly know about sophisticated German engineering machinery? Marcus grabbed his briefcase and headed home, completely unaware that the solution to his $12 million problem was pushing a mop just 50 feet away. The crisis was about to take an unexpected turn, but nobody saw it coming. The conference room on the 3rd floor of Riverside manufacturing plant had become a war room. Charts covered the walls. Empty coffee cups littered the large oak table, and the smell of stress and desperation hung thick in the air. Marcus Thompson sat at the head of the table, flanked by exhausted engineers and increasingly impatient executives. "Gentlemen, we're burning through cash like wildfire," announced Robert Caldwell, the chief financial officer, who had flown in from the New York headquarters. His expensive suit and perfectly styled silver hair contrasted sharply with the disheveled appearance of everyone else in the room. "At our current burn rate, we'll have lost over $4 million by the end of next month." Sarah Mitchell pushed her glasses up her nose and spoke wearily. "We've contacted every major industrial automation expert in North America. Most of them are booked solid. The ones who are available are charging premium emergency rates." Marcus felt a headache building behind his eyes. "What about the German team? Are they making any progress?" Hans Weber, the lead engineer from Kraustech, stood up slowly. His confidence from the first week had evaporated, replaced by visible frustration. "The diagnostic software shows no errors. The hardware passes every test we run. Yet the synchronization problem persists. It defies logical explanation." "That's not good enough," Robert snapped. "We didn't pay you $50,000 to tell us you're confused." Hans's face reddened. "Perhaps if your facility's infrastructure was up to European standards, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The tension in the room escalated quickly. Voices rose, fingers pointed, and old stereotypes about American versus German engineering excellence got thrown around carelessly. Marcus had to bang his hand on the table to restore order. "Fighting amongst ourselves won't fix the machines," he said firmly. "What's our next move?" Sarah pulled out a folder stuffed with business cards and proposals. "I've received quotes from several consulting firms. There's Anderson Technical Solutions from Boston. They're asking for $75,000 for a 2-week assessment. TechWave Industries from California wants $80,000 for 3 weeks. And then there's Precision Engineering Consultants from Chicago. They're the most expensive at $120,000, but they claim to specialize in European industrial equipment." Robert whistled through his teeth. "Those numbers are obscene." "So is losing $200,000 every single day," Marcus countered. "At this point, spending money to make money seems like our only option. Bring them all in, I don't care what it costs anymore." Over the next 10 days, the factory became a revolving door of consultants, experts and specialists. Each group arrived with impressive credentials, wheeling in equipment cases and setting up elaborate testing stations around the silent machines. The Anderson team consisted of 5 engineers led by Dr. Patricia Knowles, a woman with 2 PhDs and a reputation for solving impossible problems. She wore a white lab coat even though they weren't in a laboratory, and she spoke in complex technical jargon that made even experienced engineers reach for reference manuals. The electromagnetic resonance frequency might be creating harmonic interference in the distributed control system, Dr. Knowles theorized, adjusting her sophisticated oscilloscope. "We need to perform a complete spectral analysis of the entire production floor." Her team spent 3 days measuring, calculating, and analyzing. They generated hundreds of pages of data, created detailed graphs and charts, and presented their findings in a PowerPoint presentation that lasted 2 hours. Their conclusion: the electromagnetic interference was within acceptable parameters and couldn't be causing the problem. $75,000 spent. 0 progress made. The TechWave team took a different approach, led by a young hotshot programmer named Derek Chen, who had made millions developing apps in Silicon Valley. They believed the problem was purely software-related. "Hardware is easy," Derek said dismissively. "Software is where the real complexity lives. These machines are basically computers with moving parts. We just need to rewrite the communication protocols." His team of programmers set up a command center with multiple monitors, typing furiously and drinking energy drinks at an alarming rate. They worked 18-hour days, diving deep into the machine's code, looking for bugs, errors, or corrupt files. "I found something," Derek announced excitedly on day 5. "There's a recursive loop in the network handshake protocol. It's trying to authenticate but getting stuck in an infinite cycle." Everyone held their breath as Derek implemented his fix. He pressed enter with a flourish and nothing happened. The machines remained stubbornly silent. Derek's confidence deflated like a punctured balloon. $80,000 spent, still no solution. The Precision Engineering Consultants from Chicago arrived with the biggest team yet. 8 specialists, each focusing on a different aspect of the problem. Their leader, Michael Bradford, was a man in his 50s who spoke slowly and deliberately. "As if every word carried immense weight, gentlemen," he began. "You're dealing with a system integration failure of catastrophic proportions. These machines weren't designed to operate in isolation. They're part of an ecosystem, and somewhere in that ecosystem, there's a breakdown in the symbiotic relationship between hardware and software." His team took over an entire section of the factory floor. They brought in equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Thermal imaging cameras, ultrasonic sensors, vibration analyzers, and devices whose purposes nobody could identify. "We're going to map every single variable," Michael explained. "Temperature fluctuations, humidity levels, air pressure changes, vibration patterns, electrical current variations, everything. The answer is hidden in the data, and we will find it." For 2 solid weeks, the Chicago team collected data around the clock. They filled hard drives with information, created 3-dimensional models of the factory's environmental conditions, and even brought in a specialist to analyze the building's feng shui, claiming that energy flow might impact machine performance. James Washington watched all of this activity while quietly doing his job. He mopped floors, emptied trash cans, and wiped down surfaces. He saw the consultants come and go, heard their theories, and watched their experiments. Sometimes he would pause near the machines, looking at them thoughtfully before moving on with his cleaning duties. Nobody noticed him. Nobody asked his opinion. He was invisible, just part of the scenery. The Chicago team's final report was a masterpiece of technical documentation. 247 pages of analysis, complete with color-coded charts, statistical models, and recommendations. Their conclusion after burning through $120,000. The problem was multifactorial and requires further investigation, Marcus wanted to scream. Instead, he thanked them professionally and showed them to the door. In the cafeteria, workers gathered during lunch breaks, talking in worried whispers about the future. "They've brought in every expert in the country," said Tom Chen, stabbing at his meatloaf without enthusiasm. "If none of them can fix it, what chance do we have?" Jennifer Rodriguez shook her head sadly. "My neighbor works at the county office. She says the company has already filed preliminary paperwork for potential closure. They're preparing for the worst." 30 years I've worked here," added Bill Murphy. "A maintenance technician. 30 years. And it might all end because of some fancy foreign machines that nobody understands." At a nearby table, James Washington ate his sandwich in silence. He listened to the conversations around him but didn't participate. He'd learned long ago that people rarely wanted to hear what he had to say. Back in the executive conference room, Robert Caldwell was reviewing the financial statements. His expression grew darker with each page he turned. "Marcus, we're approaching the point of no return," he said grimly. "The board is losing patience. They're talking about cutting losses and shutting down the Detroit operation entirely." "Give me more time," Marcus pleaded. "There has to be someone out there who can solve this." "We've consulted over 100 engineers," Robert replied. "We've spent nearly $500,000 on expert consultants alone, not counting the daily losses from halted production. At what point do we accept that these machines are simply defective and move on?" Sarah Mitchell, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. "There's one more option. There's a legendary troubleshooter in Germany, Gustav Richter. He's retired now, but he was the original designer of the Auto Precision series. If anyone can solve this, it's him." "And what will he cost us?" Robert asked cynically. Sarah hesitated. "His consulting fee is $200,000, plus first-class travel, luxury accommodations, and a per diem of $5,000. The room fell silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing. They were throwing good money after bad, chasing an increasingly unlikely solution. But what alternative did they have? "Contact him," Marcus said finally. "Whatever it takes." As the meeting broke up and people filed out of the conference room, none of them noticed James Washington down on the factory floor. He had finished his cleaning duties for the evening and was standing near the silent machines. He reached out and gently touched one of the control panels, a sad expression on his weathered face. He knew what was wrong. He'd known for weeks, but nobody had bothered to ask the janitor. James Washington had seen a lot in his 62 years of life. He'd witnessed segregation, marched for civil rights, survived economic recessions, and raised 3 children on a janitor's salary. But nothing had prepared him for the peculiar irony of his current situation, watching an entire factory crumble while he held the answer in his mind. Every morning, James arrived at the Riverside manufacturing plant at 5:30, a full hour before his shift officially began. He liked the quietness of the empty factory, the way his footsteps echoed on the concrete floor, the peaceful solitude before the chaos of the day started. He would brew coffee in the break room, not the fancy espresso that the managers drank, but simple black coffee in an old percolator that he'd bought with his own money years ago. His routine never varied. Clean the offices first, then the bathrooms, followed by the cafeteria, and finally the production floor. He took pride in his work, even though most people walked past him as if he were invisible. A clean workplace mattered, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. James had started working at the plant in 1982, back when it was owned by a different company and produced automobile parts using machinery that seemed ancient by today's standards. He'd been hired as a temporary cleaner, expected to last maybe a few months, but he'd stayed for nearly 4 decades. What nobody knew, what nobody had ever bothered to ask, was that James Washington hadn't always been a janitor in 1979. He'd graduated from Tuskegee University with a degree in mechanical engineering. He'd been third in his class, bright and ambitious, ready to change the world. But the world hadn't been ready for him. Company after company rejected his applications. Some interviews ended abruptly when he showed up and they saw his skin color. Others never responded to his carefully crafted letters. A few were honest enough to say they didn't hire his kind for engineering positions. After 2 years of rejection and mounting bills, James had taken the janitor position at Riverside just to feed his family. His wife Dorothy had been pregnant with their first child. His pride had been wounded, but his responsibility as a father-to-be was greater than his ego. "It's temporary," he told Dorothy, "just until something better comes along." But temporary became permanent. 1 year turned into 5, then 10, then 20. The engineering knowledge in his mind slowly became a private treasure that he rarely had occasion to use. His degrees gathered dust in a drawer at home, relics of a dream deferred, yet James never stopped learning. He read technical manuals during his lunch breaks, studied new technologies in the library, and kept his mind sharp by solving engineering puzzles in his head while he mopped floors. When the factory upgraded its equipment over the years, he paid attention, learning how each new machine worked, understanding the principles behind the technology. The other janitors thought he was odd. "Why you always reading those big complicated books?" asked Tyrone, a younger cleaner who worked the evening shift. "That stuff ain't gonna help you push a mop." James would just smile and shrug. How could he explain that learning was its own reward? That knowledge didn't need a practical application to be valuable, that keeping his mind active was how he maintained his dignity in a job that society deemed unworthy. When the German machines arrived 6 months ago, James had been fascinated. He'd watched the installation process, observed the technicians as they connected cables and programmed the systems. He'd even managed to get his hands on one of the discarded instruction manuals, which he'd taken home and translated slowly using a German-English dictionary. The Auto Precision 5000 series was remarkable engineering, a symphony of hydraulics, electronics, and computer programming working in harmony. But James had noticed something during the installation that the technicians had missed. The machines were designed to communicate through a specific type of network protocol, and the factory's existing infrastructure wasn't quite compatible. He'd mentioned it once, casually, to one of the installation technicians. "Excuse me, sir, but I think there might be an issue with the network configuration." The technician, a young man with gel in his hair and arrogance in his eyes, had looked at James as if he'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. "You're the janitor, right?" "Yes, sir." "But I just thought—" "Then stick to janiting," the technician interrupted with a laugh. "Leave the engineering to people who actually understand this stuff." James had nodded quietly and walked away. He'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. When the machines broke down 3 weeks later, James wasn't surprised. He'd expected it. The communication protocol mismatch he'd noticed would eventually cause exactly the kind of synchronization failure that was now crippling the factory. He'd watched the parade of engineers with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. They were intelligent people, no doubt about that. But they were looking in all the wrong places. They assumed the problem was complex because the machines were sophisticated. They ran elaborate tests and developed intricate theories, never considering that sometimes the answer was remarkably simple. "Have you checked the network gateway settings?" James muttered to himself one evening while cleaning near a group of consultants. They were discussing quantum computing and artificial intelligence, terms that sounded impressive but had nothing to do with the actual problem. None of them heard him, or if they did, they didn't care. The janitor was just background noise, no more worthy of attention than the hum of the ventilation system. James's co-workers in the maintenance department knew he was different. He'd helped them countless times over the years with small problems. A broken conveyor belt that everyone else thought needed replacement, but James knew just needed a specific bearing adjusted. An electrical short that had stumped the electricians, but James traced to a loose connection in an unexpected location. A computer glitch that IT couldn't solve, but James fixed by recognizing an obscure software conflict. "You're wasted as a janitor," Bill Murphy had told him more than once. "You should be working with us in maintenance," but James always declined. The pay difference was minimal, and he'd grown comfortable in his role. Besides, he'd applied for maintenance positions 3 times over the years. Each time, he'd been passed over for younger workers with less experience but different skin color. Eventually, he'd stopped trying. His wife Dorothy understood his resignation, though it pained her. "You're the smartest man I've ever known," she would tell him, lying next to him in bed. The world's just too blind to see it. Maybe, James would reply. Or maybe I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Their children had turned out well despite the financial struggles. His daughter Angela was a lawyer in Chicago. His son Marcus worked as a civil engineer in Atlanta. And his youngest, Rebecca, taught mathematics at a high school in Philadelphia. They'd all urged him to retire, to enjoy his golden years. But James loved the routine of work, the structure it provided, the sense of purpose. On the evening of March 28th, 2 weeks after the crisis began, James was cleaning the executive conference room after another fruitless meeting. He could hear Marcus Thompson and Sarah Mitchell talking in the hallway, their voices heavy with defeat. "Maybe we should just accept that these machines are beyond repair," Sarah was saying. "Cut our losses and start over with different equipment." "And throw away $12 million, Marcus replied bitterly. "The board will have my head." James paused in his cleaning, looking at the whiteboard covered in complex diagrams and theories. He felt a familiar frustration rising in his chest. He'd remained silent for so long, accepted his invisibility as the price of employment, but watching good people lose their jobs over a problem he could solve felt wrong. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up a whiteboard marker. He stared at it for a long moment, decades of accumulated dismissal and discrimination weighing against his conscience. "It's not your place," a voice in his head warned. "They won't listen, they never listen." But another voice, stronger and clearer, spoke up. "How many families will suffer if this factory closes? How many children will go hungry? How many dreams will die?" James set down his cleaning supplies and approached the whiteboard. He began to write, his handwriting neat and precise, explaining in simple terms what the actual problem was: a network protocol mismatch between the machines and the factory's infrastructure. He drew a diagram showing how the machines were trying to communicate using one language, while the network expected another. He stepped back and looked at his explanation. It was clear, concise, and correct. Would anyone even see it? Would they understand that the janitor had solved what 100 engineers couldn't? James picked up his supplies and continued cleaning. Tomorrow would reveal whether decades of silence had been wisdom or cowardice. As he left the building that night, pushing his cart toward the storage room, he passed the silent machines one more time. "Soon," he whispered to them. "One way or another. This ends soon." The security guard at the front desk nodded to him as he clocked out. "Have a good night, James. You too." "Sir?" James replied as he always did outside. The Detroit night was cold and clear. James pulled his coat tighter and walked toward the bus stop. His feet ached, his back was sore, but his mind was finally at peace. He'd done what he could. The rest was in God's hands. What James didn't know was that his simple explanation on the whiteboard was about to change everything. Not just for the factory, but for his own life in ways he couldn't imagine. The invisible man was about to become impossible to ignore. Marcus Thompson arrived at the factory earlier than usual on March 29th. Sleep had eluded him most of the night. His mind kept cycling through worst-case scenarios: layoff notices, bankruptcy proceedings, the devastated faces of 1,500 employees learning they'd lost their livelihoods. The weight of responsibility sat on his shoulders like a boulder. He trudged up the stairs to the 3rd floor, bypassing the elevator as he often did when he needed time to think. His shoes echoed in the empty stairwell, each step feeling heavier than the last. When he reached the conference room, he flicked on the lights and headed straight for the coffee maker in the corner. While waiting for the coffee to brew, Marcus turned toward the whiteboard where yesterday's failed theories still cluttered the surface. But something was different in the bottom right corner. Written in unfamiliar handwriting was a new diagram with accompanying text. Marcus moved closer. Squinting at the neat, precise lettering, the explanation was remarkably straightforward, almost embarrassingly simple compared to the elaborate theories that surrounded it. Someone had identified the problem as a network protocol mismatch. The machines were attempting to communicate using industrial Ethernet power link, while the factory's infrastructure only supported standard Profinet. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, reading through the explanation again. It made sense, perfect sense actually. But who had written it? He pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the whiteboard, then immediately called Sarah Mitchell. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Sarah, get down to the conference room right now," Marcus said urgently. "Someone's written a solution on the whiteboard. What, who, I don't know. Just get here." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood beside Marcus. studying the diagram with growing excitement. "This could actually be it," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's so obvious. Why didn't we see this?" "Because we were looking for something complicated," Marcus replied. "We assumed that expensive, sophisticated machines must have equally sophisticated problems." "Who wrote this?" Sarah shook her head. "The handwriting doesn't match anyone on the engineering team. And the wording is different. It's not using the technical jargon we typically use. It's more accessible," Marcus called building security. "Hey, this is Thompson. I need to know who was in the third-floor conference room after 6 p.m. yesterday." The security guard checked his logs. Only person up there was James from the cleaning crew. "He cleans that floor every evening around 7. "James," Marcus repeated. "The janitor." "Yes, sir. Been working here longer than most of us, good man." "Never any trouble." Marcus thanked him and hung up. He looked at Sarah. "The janitor wrote this." "That's impossible," Sarah said automatically. How would he even?" But Marcus was already heading for the door. "There's one way to find out, come on." They found James in the basement break room. He was sitting alone at a small table eating his breakfast, a simple sandwich wrapped in wax paper and an apple. He looked up in surprise when the plant manager and head of engineering walked in. "Mr. Washington," Marcus said, slightly out of breath from taking the stairs too quickly. "Did you write something on the whiteboard in the conference room last night?" James set down his sandwich carefully. His weathered hands trembled slightly. "Yes, sir, I did. I apologize if I overstepped my bounds. I know it wasn't my place. I can erase it if—" "Can you explain what you wrote?" Sarah interrupted, her scientific curiosity overriding her skepticism. James stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a napkin. "Well, ma'am, it's actually quite straightforward. Your German machines are designed to communicate using a protocol called PowerLink. It's common in European manufacturing, but your factory's network infrastructure was set up for Profinet, which is what most American facilities use. They're both industrial Ethernet protocols, but they're not directly compatible." Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. James was speaking with technical precision, using terminology that most laypeople wouldn't understand. This wasn't lucky guessing, this was genuine knowledge. "Go on," Marcus encouraged. "When the machines try to synchronize their operations, they're essentially speaking different languages," James continued, warming to the subject. "The master controller sends out timing packets expecting PowerLink responses. But the network infrastructure is waiting for Profinet handshakes. After several failed attempts to establish proper communication, the safety protocols kick in and shut everything down to prevent data corruption or mechanical damage." Sarah pulled out her tablet and began taking notes. "How do you know all this?" James hesitated. Decades of learned caution, making him reluctant to reveal too much, but he'd already crossed the Rubicon by writing on that whiteboard. "I have a degree in mechanical engineering from Tuskegee University, class of 1979. I've kept up with developments in the field over the years." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus felt a mixture of emotions, astonishment, embarrassment, anger at a system that had relegated this man to pushing a mop for nearly 40 years. "Can you fix it?" Marcus asked simply. James nodded. "Yes, sir, I believe I can. You need a protocol converter, essentially a translator that sits between the machines and your network. It'll convert PowerLink packets to Profinet format and vice versa. The converters aren't expensive. Maybe $2,000 each. You'll need 6 of them, 1 for each machine." "We don't have time to order converters," Sarah said, "even with expedited shipping. That's days away." "You don't need to order them," James replied quietly. "You already have them. They came in the shipping crates with the machines. The German technicians probably assumed you had a PowerLink-compatible network and didn't bother installing them. Check storage room B on the factory floor. There's a pallet of equipment that was never unpacked. The converters should be in there, still in their original packaging." Marcus felt his heart racing. "Show us." The 3 of them walked quickly to the factory floor. A few early arriving workers watched with confusion as the plant manager and head engineer followed the janitor across the production area. James led them to a storage room that housed spare parts and equipment. "There." James pointed to a pallet covered with a tarp in the corner. "That's what was left over from the installation." 2 maintenance workers helped remove the tarp and break open the crates. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, were 6 small devices labeled in German. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she read the label. Power link to Profinet protocol converter, she translated. Oh my God. They've been here the whole time. James pulled out one of the converters and examined it. These are high-quality units. They should work perfectly with your permission. I can install them. Marcus looked at his watch. It was 6:45 in the morning. How long will it take? 10 minutes, James said confidently. Maybe less. The mounting brackets are already in place. They just need to be populated. Then it's just a matter of connecting the cables properly and configuring the basic settings. Then do it, Marcus said. Please. James removed his janitor's uniform shirt, revealing a clean white t-shirt underneath. He picked up a converter and a small toolkit that someone handed him. His movements were precise and economical. No wasted motion. He'd clearly done this type of work before. Sarah watched in fascination as James mounted the first converter. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency. Connecting Ethernet cables, power supplies, and configuration links, he worked methodically, checking each connection twice before moving to the next machine. Word spread quickly through the factory. Workers began gathering around, watching the janitor work on the machines that 100 engineers couldn't fix. The murmuring grew louder, questions bouncing back and forth. That's James from the night crew. What's he doing? I heard he's actually fixing the machines. No way. How would a janitor know what to do? Tom Chen pushed through the crowd. James went to engineering school, he said loudly. He told me years ago, but I didn't really believe him. Thought he was just talking big. Jennifer Rodriguez felt tears forming in her eyes. He's saving our jobs. James ignored the growing crowd, focusing entirely on his task. He'd waited decades for this moment. Not the recognition, but the simple opportunity to use the knowledge he'd worked so hard to acquire. His hands moved with confidence born from years of private study and suppressed expertise. 8 minutes after he started, James connected the final cable on the 6th converter. He straightened up, his back protesting slightly from bending over. That should do it, he said quietly. Marcus stepped forward. What now? Now we restart the system, James replied. The machines will go through their initialization sequence, establish communication through the converters, and if I'm correct, they'll synchronize properly within 2 minutes. Sarah moved to the main control panel. Her finger hovered over the restart button. Here goes nothing. She pressed it. The machines hummed to life. Digital displays flickered on, showing streams of data and status indicators. The crowd held its collective breath for 30 seconds. Nothing seemed to happen. Then, one by one, the machines began moving. The first robot arm extended smoothly, performing a calibration sweep. The second followed, then the third. The conveyor belt started moving. The assembly stations activated. The entire production line, silent and useless for 3 weeks, was suddenly operating in perfect harmony. A cheer erupted from the crowd. Workers hugged each other, some openly crying with relief. Tom Chen grabbed James in a bear hug, lifting the older man off his feet. You did it. You actually did it. Marcus felt his own eyes getting misty. He extended his hand to James. Mr. Washington, I don't know what to say. You've saved this factory. You've saved all of us. James shook his hand. Just happy I could help. Sir, how much do we owe you? Marcus asked. Name your price. James looked confused. Owe me, sir. I'm just doing my job. Your job is maintenance and cleaning, Sarah interjected. What you just did, that's senior-level engineering work. That's consultant-level problem-solving. You deserve compensation. James shook his head slowly. I didn't do it for money. I did it because it needed doing. Because people needed help. That's compensation enough, but Marcus wasn't about to let it go. We'll discuss your future here later, but right now, everyone in this factory owes you their gratitude. The German engineers, who had been standing off to the side during all of this, approached sheepishly. Hans spoke first, his accent thick with embarrassment. We apologized, the protocol converters. They should have been part of our installation checklist. This was our oversight. James nodded graciously. Easy thing to miss, sir. Especially in an unfamiliar facility. His generosity made their embarrassment even more acute. As the celebration continued around him, James quietly retrieved his janitor's shirt and put it back on. He picked up his cleaning supplies, ready to return to his regular duties. But Marcus stopped him. Mr. Washington, you're not cleaning anything today, in fact. You're not cleaning anything ever again. "We need to talk about your new position at this company." James opened his mouth to protest, but the words died in his throat. For the first time in 37 years, someone was seeing him, really seeing him, not the janitor, not the invisible background worker, but James Washington, engineer. The 10 minutes that changed everything were over, but their consequences were just beginning. The news spread through Detroit like wildfire within hours. The local television stations had camera crews outside the Riverside manufacturing plant. Reporters clutched microphones and practiced their opening lines. All variations on the same incredible story. A janitor had accomplished what 100 credentialed engineers could not. Inside the factory, James Washington sat in Marcus Thompson's office, still somewhat dazed by the morning's events. The leather chair felt foreign beneath him. He'd walked past this office thousands of times over 37 years, but had never imagined sitting on this side of the desk. Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee from an expensive-looking machine, handing one to James. "I've been the manager here for 8 years, he began, "and I'm ashamed to admit I never knew your name until today. I walked past you almost every day and you were invisible to me. That changes now." James accepted the coffee with both hands, warming his fingers on the ceramic. "You're a busy man, sir. You have important things to focus on. I never expected—" "That's precisely the problem," Marcus interrupted gently. "You never expected to be seen, to be heard, to be valued for your knowledge, and we created an environment where that expectation was reasonable. That's on us, not you." Sarah Mitchell entered the office carrying a folder thick with documents. She'd spent the last 2 hours making phone calls and drafting proposals. "Mr. Washington," she said, settling into a chair beside him, "I've been reviewing our organizational structure, and I'd like to make you an offer." James set down his coffee cup carefully. "Ma'am, I appreciate whatever you're thinking, but I'm 62 years old. I'm not looking to upset any apple carts or take positions away from younger folks who—" "Stop," Sarah said firmly but kindly. "What happened today wasn't charity, it was a revelation. You possess knowledge and skills that this company desperately needs. We're not doing you a favor by recognizing that. You'd be doing us a favor by accepting." She opened the folder and pulled out several pages. "I'm proposing we create a new position, Senior Technical Advisor. Your responsibility would be to consult on complex engineering problems, train junior engineers, and help bridge the gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. The starting salary would be $95,000 annually, plus full benefits and a signing bonus of $50,000 as compensation for—" Well, for 37 years of underutilization, James felt his breath catch. The numbers seemed incomprehensible. He'd been making $32,000 a year as a janitor, barely scraping by. Now they were offering him nearly 3 times that amount. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Say yes," Marcus urged. "Please, we need you. This factory needs you." Before James could respond, there was a knock on the door. Robert Caldwell, the chief financial officer from New York, entered with his phone pressed to his ear. He covered the mouthpiece. "Marcus, the CEO wants to speak with Mr. Washington personally. He's flying in this afternoon." The next few hours passed in a blur. James found himself giving interviews to local news stations, his weathered face appearing on television screens across Michigan. Workers who had barely acknowledged him for decades suddenly wanted to shake his hand, share meals with him, hear his story. Tom Chen brought his entire family to meet James. "This is the man I told you about," he said to his teenage daughter. "He saved my job. He saved all our jobs." Jennifer Rodriguez hugged James tightly, tears streaming down her face. "My husband was talking about moving to Texas to find work. Now we can stay. Our kids can stay in their school, thank you." "Thank you so much." Bill Murphy from maintenance pulled James aside. "I told you years ago you were wasted as a janitor," he said gruffly. Glad someone finally listened. By afternoon, the factory parking lot had filled with news vans. The story had transcended local interest and gone national. Cable news networks picked it up, framing it as an inspirational tale about overlooked talent, systemic bias, and the triumph of perseverance. James watched the coverage on the break room television with a mixture of discomfort and wonder. A CNN anchor was describing him as a real-life hidden figure, comparing his story to the African-American women mathematicians who had worked at NASA. "I'm not a hero," James said quietly to no one in particular. "I just fixed a machine." Dorothy Washington arrived at the factory around 3 o'clock. having seen her husband on the news at her church's community center. She was a small woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. When she saw James, she rushed to him and wrapped her arms around his neck. 37 years, she whispered. 37 years I watched you come home tired and underappreciated. I watched that brilliant mind of yours go to waste today, finally. The world sees what I've always seen. James held his wife close. I should have spoken up sooner, he said. Should have fought harder. You survived, Dorothy replied, pulling back to look at him. You kept our family fed. You raised 3 beautiful children. You never became bitter or gave up learning. That took more strength than any fight. Their children began arriving throughout the afternoon. Angela drove up from Chicago, still in her lawyer's suit from a morning court appearance. Marcus Jr. flew in from Atlanta on the first available flight. Rebecca left her high school class in the hands of a substitute teacher and made the drive from Philadelphia. The family reunion happened in the factory cafeteria, transformed for the occasion into an impromptu celebration space. Workers brought food from home. Someone set up a sound system, and what had started as a crisis had evolved into a party. James sat surrounded by his family, watching his co-workers laugh and dance, feeling a sense of belonging he'd never quite experienced in all his years at the plant. He'd always been present but apart, visible but unseen. Now he was genuinely part of the community. The CEO of Riverside Manufacturing, Gerald Hartman, arrived at 5 o'clock in a sleek black car. He was a tall man in his 60s with distinguished gray hair and an expensive suit. He found James quickly and extended his hand. Mr. Washington. I owe you an apology, Gerald said without preamble. This company has failed you for nearly 4 decades. We've benefited from your labor while ignoring your potential. That ends today. I'm personally ensuring that your new position comes with every resource and respect you deserve. He handed James an envelope. Inside is a contract for the senior technical advisor position, along with some additional compensation. We can never truly make up for lost time, but we can acknowledge our failure and commit to doing better. James opened the envelope. His hands shook as he read the contents. In addition to the salary Sarah had mentioned, there was a retroactive merit bonus of $200,000, full pension benefits calculated from his original hire date, and a formal apology letter on company letterhead. This is too much, James protested weakly. It's not nearly enough, Gerald countered. You saved us from bankruptcy. You preserved 1,500 jobs. You solved a $12 million problem in 10 minutes. If anything, we're still underpaying you. As evening approached, the local news aired a longer segment about James's story. The reporter had done her homework, interviewing James's former professors at Tuskegee, who remembered him as an exceptional student. She'd found records of his job applications from the early 1980s, documenting the systematic rejection he'd faced. The segment also included interviews with the various consulting firms who had failed to solve the problem. Most were gracious in defeat, though a few tried to save face by claiming they'd been close to a breakthrough. Dr. Patricia Knowles, the consultant with 2 PhDs, was refreshingly honest. I'm embarrassed, she admitted on camera. We brought in sophisticated equipment, ran elaborate tests, and never considered that the solution might be simple. We also never thought to consult the people who work with these machines every day. That was arrogance on our part. The German engineers from Kraustech issued a formal statement praising James's technical knowledge and apologizing for their installation oversight. They also announced they were revising their training protocols to prevent similar problems in the future. Social media exploded with reactions to James's story. Justice for James trended nationally. People shared their own experiences of being overlooked or underestimated. The story resonated deeply, touching on issues of race, class, education, and the often invisible barriers that prevented talented people from reaching their potential. Universities reached out, offering James honorary degrees. Engineering societies invited him to speak at conferences. A literary agent called about a potential book deal. Several film producers expressed interest in adapting his story. James was overwhelmed by the attention. I just want to do good work, he told Marcus during a quiet moment. All this fuss, it's not really me. Maybe not, Marcus replied. But you've become a symbol, whether you want to be or not. Your story means something to people, it gives them hope. The following Monday, James reported for his first day as senior technical advisor. Sarah had set up a proper office for him. complete with a drafting table, computer workstation, and walls lined with technical reference books. His name was on the door, James Washington, Senior Technical Advisor. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. 37 years of mopping floors, emptying trash cans, and being invisible had led to this moment. It felt like a dream. His first assignment was to conduct a comprehensive review of all the factory's equipment, identifying potential problems before they became crises. He was also asked to develop a training program for junior engineers, teaching them not just technical skills but the importance of simple, elegant solutions. Over the following weeks, James discovered that his years as a janitor had given him unique insights. He knew the factory better than anyone, understood how the different systems interacted, recognized patterns that others missed. His practical knowledge, combined with his engineering education, made him invaluable. He also became a mentor to younger workers, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds who saw their own potential reflected in his story. He established a scholarship fund for employees' children interested in engineering, funded partially from his bonus. The factory's productivity increased dramatically. James identified several inefficiencies that, while not catastrophic like the machine failure, were costing the company money. His solutions were invariably simple, practical, and effective. Dorothy noticed the change in her husband immediately. He came home energized rather than exhausted, excited to talk about his day rather than quietly resigned. The light that had dimmed over decades of disappointment was burning brightly again. "You're happy," she observed one evening as they sat on their porch. "I am," James admitted, "for the first time in a very long time. I feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do. Not that cleaning wasn't honest work. It was. But this, using my mind, solving problems, teaching others, this feels right." 6 months after the incident, Riverside Manufacturing Plant was featured in a business magazine as a model of operational excellence. The article prominently mentioned James's contributions, but also highlighted the company's commitment to identifying and utilizing hidden talent within their workforce. Other companies began implementing similar programs, looking for overlooked employees who might possess valuable skills. The James Washington effect, as it became known, sparked a broader conversation about talent recognition and workplace diversity. James never forgot where he came from. He kept his janitor's uniform hanging in his office closet as a reminder. On difficult days, when complex problems seemed unsolvable, he would look at it and remember that the solution was often simpler than it appeared. He also maintained relationships with the cleaning crew, eating lunch with them regularly, asking about their lives, their dreams, their hidden talents. He discovered that one of the night janitors had been a master electrician in his home country. Another had a degree in computer science but couldn't find work due to language barriers. James advocated for these workers, helping them transition into positions that better utilize their skills. He became a champion for the invisible, using his newfound influence to ensure that others didn't spend decades overlooked as he had. On the first anniversary of solving the machine crisis, the company held a celebration. They unveiled a plaque on the factory floor commemorating the event. It read, "On this spot, James Washington demonstrated that knowledge, perseverance, and humility are more valuable than credentials. May we never again overlook the potential within our midst." During the ceremony, James was asked to give a speech. He stood before the assembled workers, many of whom had become genuine friends over the past year. He thought about what to say, about the lessons learned, about the wasted years and the unexpected redemption. "I'm not special," he began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I'm just someone who was given an opportunity to use knowledge I'd kept locked away for too long. But I guarantee you, there are others like me. People with hidden talents, suppressed dreams, unused education, they're all around us. Working jobs that don't reflect their potential. The real lesson here isn't about me. It's about looking at each other differently, seeing possibilities instead of positions, recognizing that talent doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits quietly in the background, hoping for a chance." The applause was thunderous. James looked out at the crowd and saw tears in many eyes. He saw Tom Chen, who had recently been promoted to shift supervisor. He saw Jennifer Rodriguez, who was now studying for her engineering certification with James's encouragement. He saw Bill Murphy grinning with pride, and he saw the cleaning crew standing in the back, watching one of their own receive recognition that seemed impossible just a year ago. After the ceremony, a young janitor approached James hesitantly. He was maybe 25, with nervous eyes and calloused hands. "Mr. Washington," he said quietly, I have an associate degree in robotics. I've been working here for 2 years. Cleaning. I never said anything because, well, who would listen to a janitor?" James smiled and put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "I'm listening," he said. "Tell me about robotics. Tell me what you know. Tell me what you dream about." As the young man began talking, his voice gaining confidence, James felt a profound sense of peace. The cycle was breaking. The invisible were becoming visible, and somewhere in Detroit, in factories and offices and warehouses across the city, other hidden talents were watching, hoping, waiting for their own moment to step forward. James Washington had fixed more than machines. He'd fixed something more important. The assumption that worth was determined by title rather than by talent. That potential was visible only to those who bothered to look. And that, he reflected as he listened to the young janitor's dreams, was worth far more than any salary, any bonus, any recognition. It was redemption, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or invisible. The story of the janitor who saved the factory had ended, but the story of what that moment inspired was just beginning.